What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 87 of the Book Binge, where this week we're having a little bit of a discussion episode, which is actually based entirely or almost entirely on a sort of question that I put into a Discord server or two, the main one being the server for Mike at Mike's Book Reviews. If you want to check out that place, I'm there actually fairly regularly. Over in that Discord server, we do relatively frequently do a thing called Question of the Day, where somebody will submit a question or one of the mods will pin a question or something like that. Just, asking the people of the server whatever the question is for the day. And then through the course of the next 24 hours, sometimes it's a couple days before a new question gets asked, or sometimes you get more questions more frequently. But, over the course of generally a day, you'll have most people in the server answer that question. Relatively recently, at the time of recording, I did run a question in that channel, I suppose I should say, asking what people's preferences were between physical reading, e-reading, and audiobooking for doing their reading stuff, and why, what some of these people's reasons for choosing some of the things were, or maybe some people's reasons for not preferring a particular medium. So I actually got a surprising amount of responses. I got a heck of a lot more responses for this, obviously because it was in the Question of the Day channel, than I did for, say, my first discussion video, which was long time ago, a video about whether you should read the book or watch the adaptation first. That one I got like maybe 6 responses for, technically. Maybe it was 8 or something like that, so not very many. So I didn't really have much to go off of. This time around, I'm going to have a lot to go off of, because I think I had a total of, let's see, how many responses is this? I had a total of about 40 responses in total, actually. So that was actually quite a larger turnout, and with, I'm going to say, results that I wasn't quite expecting. First of all, this video isn't going to go into any form of which one of these is actually the best. This is just kind of, like I said, a discussion video. I'm going to go over some of the reasons that people said for preferring certain mediums, and then at the very end of the video, I'm going to go over my preference and why I hold that preference. Each of these mediums has pros and cons, and speaking on that topic now, let's go in favor of physical reading, which I had a total of 14 direct responses for, and then 6 other people who said that physical would be their preference if their current preference wasn't their preference. So basically a second place. So 14, and then technically 6 other people as well for that one. Part of the reason that some people prefer physical reading seems to be because there's a sort of magic to it, and this is something that I can agree to as well. There's a more tactile manner to reading, just kind of the weight of a book, especially with heavier ones. Like, there's just something to having the weight of it. Turning the actual pages of a book while you're reading is something that a lot of people enjoy doing. There's the smell of books as well, depending on how old or new they are. Like, there's the smell of fresh books, there's the smell of relatively aged books. Physical reading also can be a great way to do collections, which you'll see in the background of this video. I have a couple shelves here. I've done my fair share of collecting, especially in regards to this series down here. Although that is a little bit more, a visual preference rather than the actual reading itself. I do think it is a valid reason for preferring physical reading. If you like to just have the books around in your house or in your room to look at, that's pretty neat as well. There are plenty of people in the Discord, where I got most of these responses from, who, well, let's just say, have some fantastic looking shelves. There are some of them that are just absolutely gorgeous and beautiful, far and away better than anything I could ever come up with for the backgrounds of these videos. And yeah, having a physical collection does look nice, very much so. Physical reading is also apparently generally better for stuff like manga or comics, because ebook formats tend to not get those entirely right a lot of the time. Don't quote me on that. This is kind of the understanding that I got from the couple responses that mentioned this. If this is wrong, I apologize for putting it in this section. But I've also seen many people's collections of manga, for example, that are just insanely uniform. Manga publishers definitely have it figured out when it comes to publishing, series and stuff that actually look like they belong in the same series, rather than doing the whole what Saga Press initially did with Dandelion Dynasty, where, yeah, that 4th book absolutely just butchered, the matching format. manga definitely does that a little bit better. So it's some things are a little bit easier to collect physically than other things, depending on popularity and stuff like that as well. Another thing that I saw one particular person respond to in favor of physical reading was that it doesn't interfere with time for podcasts or music. As in, some people who prefer audiobooks, the times that, when you're audiobooking, like during chores or maybe on a commute to work or, certain similar things like that, times when other people might be audiobooking, some people would rather be listening to podcasts or listening to music. I myself listen to a lot of music, especially on commutes, because that's just something that I enjoy doing. I find it to be more enjoyable. Doing chores and stuff like that, I also listen to music doing that kind of stuff because it makes the time go by quicker, especially when it's music that I love listening to already. So stuff like that is another reason why physical reading can be pretty nice because, if you are a fan of music or podcasts, you're not interfering with your time to consume those if you're not audiobooking with them. And then there's another final point, which kind of goes into a little bit more of like sort of the smell of books and collecting books. There's the fact that physical books can have a history to them, especially with older stories. Books, bindings, specific editions of books that maybe have been passed down through a few generations of the family. Like I have editions of some books in the family library downstairs that are from when my parents were kids. And it's really cool to have those there. Even if some of those are maybe books that I never plan to read, never really want to read, it's just the idea that some of those books have history is nice. The fact that somebody somewhere at some point in time will probably inherit some of the books that I own is actually really neat. Some of those people, like say grandkids or great grandkids or somebody in the future will probably pick up some of these books and be like, yeah, my grandpa or my great grandpa used to own this, or they used to read from this edition, and there can be a little bit of a special connection, kind of associated with that. In favor of e-reading, I had 9 direct responses and then 2 secondary responses to this one as well. There's huge benefits for e-reading for people who, are hard of seeing or something like that, people who are a little bit more blind or who are getting older and reading is just a little bit harder. Nothing to be ashamed of. As you get older, your eyes just get weaker. I'm somebody who's been blind my whole life. I'm not looking forward to the days when I reach, my 40s, when that starts to be a struggle for me as well. E-reading has the option to modify the text, the size, the type of font it is, all of this kind of stuff. If you can easily modify the text, you don't have to worry about it, where books can come in all forms of sizes in terms of the font and even just the type of font. Like some of those Wheel of Time books up there have really, really tiny font, whereas some other books, like say some YA books, like let's just bring up a comparison right now since I happen to have the books right next to me. Eye of the World has pretty small text, and this isn't even the smallest that some of the fonts get in the Wheel of Time series, versus, say, this Gregor and the Code of Claw, a YA series, or it's actually more middle grade than it is YA, but then you see how large the font is here. You can have hugely different varying formats there. With e-reading, you can pretty much customize everything to how you need it or how you like it, depending on what you're doing and what your preferences are, and that's really nice for that purpose. Ebooks, especially if you're doing stuff with Kindle, I believe, you can connect to certain reading programs such as Goodreads directly, so you can save quotes, you can easily highlight and make notes of certain things, and you can save those. Those can go cross-platform, so it's not confined to like a single notebook or something like that, or a single actual binding of a book if you happen to write in the margin, if you're one of those people. Ebooks also have the ability to be able to read without having a light or a lamp on, so a lot of people have spouses or other forms of significant others who maybe don't share in the same hobbies that they do, or if they do, maybe don't do it at the same time. Some people like to read in bed before they go to sleep. Some people just like to go to sleep. So if you happen to have a spouse who is like that and you want to read, if you have an ebook, you don't have to keep a light on, and therefore you don't have to bug your spouse very much with that. That is another huge bonus of e-reading, something that that even I appreciate as somebody who doesn't actually e-read that much, and you can see I'm kind of tipping my hand already throughout this video for what my preference is. E-reading can also be really nice for traveling, for portability. It's really easy to just take a Kindle, or if you happen to read on your phone as well, you could just take your phone with you like you're going to anyway. It's a lot easier to take that kind of stuff because you're not having to lug actual chonkers. If I happen to be reading these 3 books at the same time, I wouldn't have to haul these 3 books. I could just have my phone And if they're all on there, then boom, problem solved. Don't have to deal with it. That can be really nice and efficient for some people as well. Ebooks also tend to be cheaper most of the time, and they should be, because you're just getting an electronic file. That's all that those are. You're not having to go through the entire process of publishing where you're having to bind everything and actually format and all that kind of stuff. You do have to format books to go into an ebook format, but there's not quite as much labor involved with doing that as there is with formatting for an actual physical printing. And then, of course, there is the costs of actually printing and binding and all of that kind of stuff. So ebooks do also tend to be cheaper. Ebooks take less space as well. If you just have one device that has hundreds of books on it, you don't have to deal with having several bookshelves. I loathe the day that I'm going to have to move at some point in time in my life, because going to be a pain in my butt with how many books that I have. That's probably the worst thing about physical books, is just how much space they take and how much they weigh, like how difficult it is to transport them. Deceptively so, for sure. Another thing for ebooks in favor of them is that small hands. This was actually something that somebody commented out about specifically. Is people with really small hands or short fingers can sometimes struggle to hold certain large books, or might be too strained, or if you just have a really large book in general, it can just be uncomfortable to read from in the first place, like this edition of Les Mis that I have that I read from, which is huge, and it is chunky, like it is heavy. This is real thick, heavy duty paper. You can really feel it. It wasn't exactly the easiest book to straight up read from because of that. And, if you happen to have smaller hands, or if you just don't enjoy the strain on your wrist or your arms or whatnot, depending on your reading positions, it can be difficult to read a book like this unless you're e-reading it, because if you e-read really large books, you never feel the weight of it. It doesn't feel any different because it's just your reading device. Finally, in favor of audiobooks, I only had 3 direct responses and then 2 secondary responses for this one. This actually really surprised me. I was thinking I was going to have more e-reading responses than I was going to have physical, and I was thinking I was going to have a similar amount of audiobook responses compared to e-reading. But keep in mind, I didn't change people's answers. I didn't do that. But based off of what people said, some people said they have a preference, but they also have something that they actually do more often. That's what kind of these secondary responses mean. I suppose I should have said this at the beginning of the video, but that's what the secondary responses mean. So the 2 secondary responses for audiobooks are people who do audiobooking a lot more than they do either other format, but they prefer a different format. So somebody might prefer e-reading, but they do more audiobooking. So that's kind of where some of those discrepancies come from. Either way, as I was saying, in favor of audiobooks, there are actually some great things about audiobooks. First of all, you don't have to worry about actually reading. There's tons of conditions that might make physical or even e-reading in some scenarios difficult, if not impossible. There's various different videos about certain audiobook narrators, for example. Like there's one specifically, I can't remember who it was, but Tokyo sent me a link to it. Can't remember his name for some reason. Who explains a lot of reasons why he got into the audiobook business, why he became a narrator. And a lot of those things that makes him love the medium so much is because there are people who just straight up cannot read otherwise, whether it be people who are blind or other conditions that just make it very difficult to physically or even e-read as a whole. Audiobooks can be a way to experience books for those kinds of people. Like that's easily the most objectively that's the biggest objective benefit of audiobooking, is that people who can't read, you don't have to worry about as much because you can just listen to the story. As I mentioned earlier as well, it is easy to do chores or go on walks, do exercising, commutes. If you're a truck driver, I know plenty of truck drivers who do a lot of audio while they're doing their, deliveries and stuff like that. That's another great time for audiobooks to shine when, say, listening to music over and over can get a little bit annoying. For example, something that I particularly enjoy about audiobooks, even though I do it very rarely and actually don't love audiobooking, something that it does do for me, depending on the narrator and the book as well, is it kind of reminds me of having stories read to me as a kid. It's kind of like a nostalgic type of feeling for me. I'm sure that there are some other people who feel somewhat similar in some essence in this regard, if not completely, but maybe at least a little bit. Audiobooks also generally tend to be more convenient. Like I said, they're very easy to kind of fit into a lot of different everyday tasks. You can listen to audiobooks while you're doing chores, while you're walking, while you're cooking, while you're doing a whole heck of a lot of different stuff. Whereas eyeball reading, we'll say, where you actually have to be reading from a physical book or an e-reader, it doesn't matter either one, you actually have to sit down somewhere or have the book with you and actually spend the time to read it, whereas you can kind of go on autopilot and do some other stuff while you're audiobooking. Although that does come with the cost of why a lot of people don't enjoy audiobooking very much. Sometimes it's hard to pay attention to it. You don't often catch everything while you're audiobooking. But the convenience is definitely something that makes audiobooks good. Audiobooks can also be great for rereading, as paying attention isn't quite so necessary. Kind of where that downside comes into play. If you've already read a book, but you just kind of want to experience it more or less again, but just in a more chill or relaxed manner, and you don't really care about catching every single little detail, audiobooks can do that for you, because if you space out for a few seconds or something like that, it's not going to be as much of an issue, because you've already read the story. But wait, there's also more, because I completely forgot to include in the poll immersive reading, but I did have 4 responses of people who directly chose immersive reading specifically, and one other person who said that they find themselves immersive reading a lot, even if it's not inherently their preference. The thing with immersive reading that makes it so great is, first of all, that it is, well, it is more immersive, hence the name. You get the best of both worlds when it comes, when it comes right down to it, you just get the best of both worlds. You get to have all the benefits of audiobooking, or most of the benefits of audiobooking, but also the benefits that you might prefer between physical or e-reading. You get to do them both together, and it provides you more focus, more, you're just honed in on one particular work, and that's all that you're experiencing it. You're listening to somebody read it to you while you're following along. It kind of creates this much more focused environment, and this was actually something that I didn't know before. I guess audiobooks are also discounted, I believe, on Audible if you happen to own the Kindle. What am I even saying? English is hard. Audiobooks can be discounted if you already own the Kindle version. So if you happen to like immersive reading for e-reading and audiobooking together, even though you are having to buy books twice, which is probably the main reason why I don't personally want to do much of that, you can get discounted versions of either or, and that would make it a little bit more accessible. But then I also had I had 2 people who did not actually choose, who in their responses were kind of like, I like all of them for different reasons, or I don't necessarily have a preference. Whatever it was they said. I did have 2. There might have been a third person. I can't remember off the top of my head, because I did compile results and then I had like 2 or 3 more responses afterwards. There might have been a third, but at least 2 people basically said that they don't have a direct preference between, ebook, physical books, or audiobooks, or even immersive reading. They just like the flexibility of having all of them. I know one of them in particular is somebody who happens to have 10 plus books going on at any given point in time, so no matter what their mood is, they can go to whatever book it is that they're reading, based off of what they're interested in. And since they have so many books going on at the same time, a lot of times they can have those books on different formats, and sometimes they can choose which book they're reading based off of what they have the availability to do. If they have 2 or 3 books going on between e-reading, physical reading, and audiobooking, between all 3 different formats, then depending on what their situation is, if they're needing to do chores or are going somewhere, then they can choose one of the audiobooks they're reading. Or if they want the more tactile experience of physical reading, they can choose one of the 2 or 3 physical books that they're reading. So there's a lot more flexibility in that regard. So I can understand why there are a couple fence sitters in this particular discussion, because that flexibility is in and of itself kind of an option. But yeah, there were a couple people who did not express a specific preference. My preference, personally, I think everybody knows, and especially if you were paying attention to what I was saying during all of the 3 major sections of this video, I think everybody already knows that my preference is physical, hence why I have a million books in the background of this video, and have pretty much always had books in the backgrounds of my videos, except for some of my very early ones where I didn't have a bookshelf back there yet. But either way, my preference is definitely reading physical. I can do audio sometimes for some things, usually things that I wouldn't read otherwise. One of those examples particularly being The Wandering Inn, which is a web novel. I would never read a web novel just straight up with my eyeballs. I read far too slow and have way too many other books that I want to read, where I just can't spare the time to go and read a web novel just because I want to read it, especially ones like The Wandering Inn, where they are expanding so quick and their authors write so like unbelievably quickly. It doesn't make sense how anybody could possibly write that quick. That's not something that I'm going to do eyeball reading. So since they are coming out on audio, sure, I can give stuff like that a shot on audio because I would not experience otherwise. So that's one of the reasons why I would do audio sometimes. But otherwise, I completely see and respect everybody who has a different preference between e-reading or audiobooking or even immersive reading, even if they're not entirely my thing. I prefer physical, but if there's anybody who's watching this video who did not partake in the sort of survey, I guess, I did regarding this, shout off what you prefer in the comments below and why. I'd love to know more opinions. Otherwise, that is the end of this video. Sorry it went on a little bit longer than I was expecting. I was thinking this would be like maybe a 10 to 15 minute long video. Now it seems it might be like 20 minutes, maybe longer. I'll be back next week with a classic review about War and Peace, which is one that I think a lot of people should read. So I recommend everybody watching this go watch that video when it comes out next Tuesday. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching. I'll be back in the next video.